chicanery and what was in many cases digital harassment. Nothing ultimately happened, and that's good. And a lot of the harassment was rather ridiculous, but it was what it was. A line was crossed. I never crossed that line. And in fact, I told people to stop crossing that line. I went to the local paper and gave a statement. I went on YouTube and gave a statement to that effect, saying, look, obviously, I wanted the story to come out because Tanya Gersh was putting herself forward in the mainstream media and as a victim, and she's nothing of the kind. And I wanted that story to come out, but I wanted people to express opinion and outrage. Turning it into a troll campaign and claiming that there was going to be a neo-Nazi rally in Whitefish was quite possibly the stupidest way to respond. Kind of makes you wonder what Andrew Anglin's intentions were, or the intentions of his fans, who have never really liked me and now passionately hate me. But it is what it is. But anyway, I've accepted all requests. So if anyone wants to just speak up,
Yes.
we can go in order and we can talk about this or something more interesting.
I have a question.
Sure. Who is this?
This is just Red Midnight. I was wondering.
Hi, can you hear me?
What is your predictions for political reality in America for the next 10 years?
Okay. That's a good one. To say that America is going to be hyper polarized is almost cliche at this point, but I don't think we've seen the end of it. And I think we're going to see a lot more of the Marjorie Taylor Greene type stuff going forward. And that is a double-edged sword. And this kind of reminds me of a lot of the stuff we were talking about the other night, I guess it was 2 days ago, in the sense that the Trumpism, the culture war dialed to 11 is going to be attractive to many people. It's going to energize them. It's going to bring out people who might otherwise be apathetic and to get them involved in politics, though getting them involved in the stupidest way possible. And I think that's going to kind of serve the GOP pretty well. But it's going to also lead to a very strong allergy to the GOP on the part of suburban white professionals, just to give them a name or a class. And so it is going to kind of alienate as many people as it energizes. Now, how exactly that's going to play out, I don't know. But that is my broad strokes. So I would say that in 2024, for the midterms, the GOP has a very good chance of taking back the House. And I'm going to have to, before I talk about the Senate, I would have to look at the actual numbers, because the Senate is a little more difficult to predict, because the House, everyone gets voted in or out every 2 years. With the Senate, it's every 6 years. And so there are these weird combinations where, there'll be a lot of toss-up states one year, or there'll be a year where the GOP, say, has all safe seats that are up for re-election, and it might look like this massive victory, but it wasn't really a victory at all. And so I'll have to look at the Senate, but I would imagine the Senate would be close. I wouldn't be shocked if the GOP took the House and the Senate, but again, I'll just have to look at these numbers once we're, say, 6 months out, and then I can make a prediction kind of just based on, Gaussian laws of, you're going to win 50% of the toss-ups, you're going to hold 75% of the safe states. And so there's going to be a little bit of, leeway in between those. So I think they're going to do that. I do think that Trump will run in 2024. I think a lot of GOP people will step aside for him. And I do think that he will energize this kind of a post alt-right Trump. It might go in a new direction that we can't even predict, but I don't think we're going to have a rehash of 2016. where he was the chaos candidate and coming out of nowhere, and we all just kind of projected our hopes and dreams on him. I think he's going to energize that massive base of the former religious right, QAnon people, and a lot of average Republicans, a lot of people who get really excited about the culture war, or maybe his discussion of toilet flushing at these mass rallies. He's going to energize those people, and I think he is going to be crushed by Joe Biden, who keeps getting underestimated. And everyone thinks that he's too old, he won't last the whole term. I think he's going to run again, and I think he's going to crush Trump. And I think he might arguably be the one who can do it. Maybe some other Democrats can win, but Kamala Harris does not have the appeal that Biden does. And all of these other Democrats are really tainted in the sense that they are going to alienate a center, which does exist within polarization. And so I think we're going to get 8 years of Biden. It's going to be just the geriatric presidency. And after that, it's hard to predict because kind of all bets are off. I do think there's going to be a dramatic change in politics once this generation of politicians just can't run again due to age, among other things. Hope that answered the question. Okay, I will go down the list in just the order that you are appearing to me on my phone. So, Clayton, you are next.
Sure, thanks, Richard. So yeah, this is, I guess, a two-part question, just related to one another. First off, like something that I like, personal gripe I have with the dissident right, and I'm wondering if you agree with me, is that it seems like they're attracted intellectually to a lot of philosophers who are kind of very fringe and not in like the Western canon of history of philosophy. And it might be interesting, but like people on the distant right seem more likely to read someone like Evola rather than like Aristotle or Plato. And it does seem to kind of like intellectually constrain. I mean, first of all, because I don't think you can understand a lot of these figures like Schmidt without understanding like Hegel. So it seems like it's constraining. So I'm curious, one, if you think this is a problem, and two, are there figures kind of in the canonical history of Western thought, particularly figures who are associated with like more kind of conventionally conservative attitudes, like someone like Edmund Burke, that you think the dissident right could have like learned from a more nuanced reading of these people? Are there figures that you think that should be given more of a central place in contemporary like dissident right-wing thought? I guess that's
yes. That's a excellent question, and I'm going to talk about that. Give me one moment here. I am just driving, and I'm passing through a tough patch here where my signal usually goes out, so I'm just going to be silent for about 10 seconds.
Sure, no worries.
I bet that driving through Montana is beautiful.
Okay, do you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Okay, good. I'm back. There is this one spot that is untouched by satellites. I guess if I wanted to commit a murder, I would just go right there. Oh, oops, did I say that? No. You could commit the perfect crime that is outside of the digital canopy. Okay, so first off, let me talk about Evola. Should you read Evola? Is Evola fascinating and interesting?
I think now you might be having connection issues. I can't hear you.
Now I'm reconnected.
Yeah, now you're back.
Okay, I'm now indoors, so all right, so I have Wi-Fi, so no issue. Okay, I'll just reiterate what I just said. So is Evola fascinating, and should you read him if you want to? Yes. Does Evola is Evola kind of problematic in the sense that he inspires just a real shallow traditionalism uh, that I think is just really unhelpful and uninteresting? The answer to that is also yes. I think there are a lot of people who will kind of read Evola and just have this vague notion about, riding the tiger, raging against the modern world and becoming an aristocrat of the soul and all of this stuff. I just see it all the time among people who are Evola fans. And, people like Evola and Spengler are kind of Nietzsche's children. They're addressing problems, and Heidegger, I would say as well. They're addressing problems that Nietzsche announced and dealt with very, very well, seriously, but also in a very Nietzschean manner. That is, rather flippantly on some level. I think that Nietzsche was kind of failed by a lot of his children. And I think there's actually there's a lot more to be gained by kind of going back to Nietzsche, fleshing things out, trying to understand what he's saying, and then following logical lines from there. Then kind of reading Evola. I think Evola gives people a kind of pat sense of self-satisfaction that, the world is a vale of tears, and I can just reject the modern world and kind of, live as an aristocratic of the soul, and embrace this kind of capital T perennialism where, all religion is one and all trying to get at the heart of the divine. And so I just think it leads to a lot of fuzzy, lame thinking, to be honest. In terms of, I think there is a great deal to be learned from reading Kant. I think there's a tremendous amount to be learned from reading Hegel, although I, of course, acknowledge that Hegel is, even in translation, unreadable in many ways. And if you read some of his lectures, I recently bought the complete edition of his lectures on religion. That is actually kind of a better starting point. And there are a lot of interesting books that will, clearly explain what Hegel is up to, but also kind of represent the complexity of his thought as well. Stanley Rosen's book on Hegel's logic is very good. I've read that twice. I still don't fully understand it, but it's definitely a good way to start. I think it's better to kind of look back to these figures and try to gain something than to find a kind of right-wing philosopher. And in terms of perennial traditionalism, I'm just highly skeptical of that whole world. And so I think also what you're saying in the sense of like a lot of people who they say, oh, I'm a philosopher now, but they're coming from politics. So they're coming from the dissident right and maybe Trumpism or what have you. But then they're like, oh, I'm going to be a philosopher about this. So they pick up a couple of Evola books and just read them in a haphazard manner. I don't think that is going to yield a lot of fruit. And I think a lot more can be gained from going back to these canonical works that are canonical for a reason. So I have a reading group where we did a long-term, multi-week, slow reading, a close reading of Plato's Republic. We've done Machiavelli's The Prince. We've read some Nietzsche. We've read Schmidt. We're currently reading Hamlet. By Shakespeare, that is a play, but one that is deeply philosophical. I just think a lot more can be gained from confronting those people and not confronting them from the lens of the 2021 dissident right. I just don't think there's a lot of fruit there. Again, if I were to kind of sum up some of many of my views, I do think that the most influential, maybe the most influential person for good and for ill has been Plato. and his construction of Socrates. The actual Socrates, we only know a little about. We have shards that we can look at. Plato's Socrates is something else. I think Platonism was deeply influential in the writing of the Gospels. I think it's obviously influential, uncontroversial influential in the development of Christianity. I would say speculatively and somewhat controversially, I think the Hellenistic world and even the world of Platonism might have even affected Judaism in the sense that it affected the translation of the Septuagint around 250 BC. And I think that maybe is a kind of underestimated component of the degree to which Hellenism influenced Judaism or the Hebrew Bible or the Pentateuch. But that's a little bit more of a speculative or bold claim. But in terms of influencing Christianity and thus kind of influencing our trajectory over the past 2,000 years, that's less controversial claim, and it is clear. So I think it's kind of where you start out. I first read Plato 20 years ago, and though I had my views, I wasn't reading him in order to get confirmation for why I was a dissident right Twitter personality. I wanted to confront him and think about him. And I feel like when we have people who want to find a philosophy that kind of fits the time, but really just kind of reconfirms, revalidates their own biases, I just don't think there's a lot of fruit there. And I actually won't name names. I have a little discussion group for Apolloist, and we were going over one of these philosophers who is always kind of name dropping Evola, and just the level of vacuous, cloudy nonsense just can't be underestimated. You don't need a philosopher to justify your contemporary biases. Just own them and assert them. If you actually want to change or develop or evolve, or maybe at least challenge yourself, then you should go to philosophy. But yeah, I think there's a lot of fruit. I hope to be able to do this over the next 10 years, but I think there's a lot of fruit to be picked from reevaluating Plato, certainly reevaluating Nietzsche, even reevaluating people like Machiavelli and Shakespeare. All right, you can stay on. I won't kick you off, but I'll just move on to another question. So, Horatius?
Yes. The regarding the issues of like Marjorie Taylor Greene and AOC, who are the sort of the very outlandish representatives that are in Congress, always making these statements that are kind of dumb in many ways. To what point do you think the internet has democratized information? In one way, that's absolutely fabulous because it allows for the dissemination of some very important ideas, concepts, and data points that have been heavily suppressed. Also, at the same time, it does in fact enable basically just grifters and, of course, the Marjorie Taylor Greene types to gain a lot of traction that they otherwise would not be able to at pretty much any other time. Do you?
Yeah, and it gives them a kind of worldview too. I mean, because I've been doing this for a while, and I always viewed the internet as a godsend in the sense that I and other people could get our thoughts out there, and they otherwise would be suppressed by the New York Times or Simon and Schuster, et cetera. And we've kind of ended up at this place where we've ended up at QAnon, which again, you can kind of chafe at liberals talking about disinformation and so on, but the fact is that kind of stuff really is disinformation, and that kind of stuff leads to toxic chaos and nonsense. And and I think we've also kind of passed through the looking glass in the sense that there's no real alternative media in the sense that that term was used even 5 years ago, in the sense that well certainly say 30 years ago, there was a common mainstream. There was a kind of conception of what is news, what's important, what's relevant, etc. And you could find alternative viewpoints out there. So you could go read Steve Saylor's blog, or read this very controversial book that is not going to get in the New York Review of Books, of whatever right-wing stuff, libertarianism, communism, etc. Now we've kind of passed through the looking glass where there is no mainstream media, in the sense that people are getting their news from Tim Pool, and they're only getting their news from Tim Pool. They are getting their news from other people like that, Joe Rogan, whatever. And they're getting their news from their Facebook group. So they're getting their news from a kind of anonymous source whom they consider base.
Well, I mean,
and there is no mainstream. That is the mainstream.
You look at like sort of the right-wing grift on YouTube. Their ideas aren't necessarily that different from like Sean Hannity, except that they have like a spicier Twitter and they probably curse a bit more.
Yeah,
which is, and so you were calling about like a lot of censorship. I recall back in 2018, Arthur Gregg Salzberger, the current chairman of the New York Times, he had like a discussion. I think he was like in Hong Kong, and he had this like fireside chat, it was called. And the title of it was How Technology Disrupted the Truth. And most of it's about bashing Trump and whatnot. But basically that title was an indication that among those of the movers and shakers in the elite institutions, Salzberger being extremely powerful, basically looked at the internet and looked at Trump and his rise, which was caused by the internet, and realized, I don't like the internet because it decentralizes the means of communication, and how it can potentially allow for, again, the dissemination of ideas that these people do not like, regardless of like this, like the outlandishness of like QAnon. And this was before QAnon, by the way.
Yeah. I can't believe I'm saying this on some level, but I have a certain sympathy for that.
Yeah. I mean, they're not evil in doing this. It's I mean, in any society, the elite will want to maintain some sort of order. Chaos, I mean, they might direct chaos at a certain entity, but they don't want complete chaos.
Right. Well, keep in mind also, it's a technological society, and I think Jacques Ellul's book, Propaganda, actually gets at this. He also wrote a book on the technological society. But so previous to the late 18th century, kind of 19th century revolution, where we have a greater urban population, you have a greater kind of proletarian population. People are moving off the farm. Peasantry is going away. You need to unify that, or kind of structure it, or control it in some fashion.
To govern people psychologically, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you always needed to govern people psychologically. It's the church was able to do that in a very powerful way, that whether that be a Catholic or Protestant manifestation. And there was a vested authority in aristocrats or royalty or the crown in some way. And those things lose that type of ability. It doesn't mean that we don't have Christianity anymore, but your local megachurch or the Roman Catholic Church or your Lutheran Church does not have that kind of function anymore. And it is, I would say these churches are, they're sources of community, sure, but I think they're kind of largely almost like recreational, if you understand my
it's sadly, there are, of course, many true believers, but to many people outside of that, they see it as a hobby almost.
Yeah, but it is a source of community. I would
Yes,
grant
naturally.
that.
I mean, Robert
Um,
Putnam, in his book about religion, points out that those institutions account for about 50% of all social capital. So it's a real serious thing.
Yeah. As a side note, I was literally bowling alone the other day. Because I had not bowled for 20 years. And then when you have younger kids, you start going bowling again. And I was bowling, and then I realized, like, all right, I actually want to get better at this. Like, I'm kind of plateaued here. And so I actually, one person gave me some real tips on like cupping the ball. And so yeah, I actually went and practiced. That's whether you consider that great or completely lame is up to you. But yeah, so to go back, uh, so what is going to channel these things? And if you think of like that tripartite society of those who work, those who fight, and those who pray, who is doing the praying now? It's not really the church. The church is largely recreational. You need someone to do the praying, and that is the media to a very, I mean, not even to a large extent. That's its role. And it's not just about unfiltered news. It is about telling you a story about what's important. And there's all this nostalgia on the right of like, we used to have real journalists or whatever, as if Walter Cronkite wasn't entirely propagandistic in his basic function, or the New York Times hasn't always been effective, essentially propagandistic in that conception of all the news that's fit to print. It's about telling a unified people what the story is.
Yes.
And it's not about information or data or whatever. And they're still doing that to a large extent. I mean, they're fighting hard. The New York Times isn't going away. From what I understand, it's actually fairly successful, like financially speaking. But it's really running up against this kind of thing where you could plausibly say that Tim Pool, who is just one of the just like most mind-numbingly, annoyingly dumb people I've ever listened to, is more like he has more narrative creating ability than a big time journalist who like spends a month on a story and does all this research and so on.
I would kind of push back from that slightly, because the people
Okay.
who are consuming Tim Pool are like either gold souls, silver souls, and bronze souls. The people who are consuming Tim Pool are like bronze souls, and the people who are actively consuming the New York Times are obviously the gold souls, and then obviously the silver souls as well.
Silver souls, yeah.
And so those who are still running the institutions are still actively consuming the New York Times, and on top of that, Tim Pool is still, his epistemology is still the same as like the New York Times, except that he might think that they're mean and he might disagree with them on like taxes and Antifa or something.
That's true.
So
that I appreciate that pushback, because he basically, a lot of the move of people like Tim Pool is that the New York Times is racist.
That's the DR3.
Yeah, exactly. But like they're as we all know, they're kind of trapped in that like mind prison of declaring that something is racist.
Sousa has said that Democrats are the real racists.
Right.
Yeah, so it's a real, even at that, with that quote unquote pushback, you're still again trapped within that same sort of mind frame, and it's really hard for people who are active participants to try to take a step back and look at this and see that this is not really a system. There's no institutional center, but that that they're really being governed psychologically, and that I don't want to say that they're being manipulated, but there really is you have, for a lot of these media institutions, they see the internet as a really big threat, regardless of its the chaos it produces. They see it as a big threat.
Yeah.
Because if you can get threatening is not the right word. If you can get a real competing epistemology to gain traction, that cannot sustain itself. A society cannot have competing epistemologies in the same way that they cannot have competing monopolies on the use of force.
I think that it's interesting, and we should add this to our discussion of polarization the other night, which is I think this is what you're saying, and I think I agree, which is that there's extreme polarization, and just like the New York Times is threatened by Tim Pool or something, the New York Times is also being threatened by its own like forces within it. It's being threatened by like woke craziness and so on. But I would still say that we have extreme polarization, but we have the same epistemology.
Yeah.
And that's the origin of the DR3 concept, or that's the origin of the fact that we hate each other with a level of passionate contempt that hasn't been seen since the Civil War. But then we kind of weirdly all agree on like basic morality. And I think you could even argue that makes it more intense in a way, because it's a fight over who is going to determine what's racist or not, or what's good or not, or what's evil or not. And it's almost going to create a kind of shrill conflict in that way.
I might be getting off here, but you could almost compare it to so like you're more racist than I am. I am the least. I'm the better at being non-racist. It's almost like the Protestants versus the Catholics saying, I am the better worshiping God. No, I am. So that's like they kind of like they have the weirdly the same endpoint, but they're coming at it from different trajectories, sort of.
Right. I mean, the Protestants and Catholics, I mean, when we look back on the Reformation or other schisms from the standpoint of 2021, we can be forgiven for saying, like, what was all the fighting about? You guys agree on the Trinity. You agree on Jesus Christ being the pathway to salvation. You agree more or less on the Bible. You agree on all of these things. You're not actually like it's Luther just wanted to go back to the Gospels. He never questioned like the legitimacy of the Nicene Council of Nicaea, or the legitimacy of the Trinity, which is not exactly a biblical concept. It's kind of developed a little bit afterward, or the concept of the divinity and personhood of Christ. I mean, they don't have any disagreements on these things. And a lot of these fights seem almost like trivial or something from our standpoint. But they agreed on epistemology, but that again, maybe that almost creates like worse battles.
So it's like Andrew Sullivan getting sort of kicked out of polite society, even though he's not really challenging their narrative, and that's narrative with a capital N. He's not really challenging it. He's just like, be more individualistic. I mean, that's kind of it. I don't want to see how he's different. Maybe he favors some tax cuts, whatever, but it's not.
Right. And Andrew Sullivan will still like tweet out about J.D. Vance talking about Afghan refugees. I mean, he can still tweet out like, this is morally repugnant.
Well, it was unironic. I think Vance tweeted out about one of them was in fact a middle-aged Afghan man with like a literal child bride. Like that was a real thing.
Right.
Just like what is going on?
Yeah.
Well, anyway, that's enough for me right now. I'll just let somebody else ask a question.
Okay. Sure. I'll go to. Does this say gay patriot or gay I can only read the first few words. But,
gay partisan.
There you go. Gay partisan.
Yeah, like
bipartisan,
even worse. But gay.
Okay.
Anywho.
I look forward to this conversation.
Okay. First of all, I want to say you're very verbose and loquacious. So yeah, and I really forgot what I was going to ask. So I'm gonna
okay. Saying that someone's verbose and loquacious isn't exactly a compliment, but did you mean it as such?
I don't know. Okay, so I don't know, like, I'm very liberal. I'm an atheist. I'm gay. I'm a refugee from Saudi Arabia, and like I was wondering, what's the? Oh my God! What's that? Anyhow, what do you think is the future course of the conservative movement? Because liberal as I am, I don't want to live under a one-party system, you know? So...
You don't?
No, I don't.
Wouldn't that be just kind of a lot easier? Nope. Okay, it wouldn't be easier? It seems like it would be a lot easier. Okay. I actually kind of answered this at the beginning. I see probably the next 10 years, I don't think there's going to be a dramatic change. I think the culture war stuff is going to be dialed up to 11. We're going to have more Marjorie Taylor Greene or Madison Cawthorn type people. It's going to be less and less about actual policy differences. And to go back to what we were just talking about with the other fellow, I don't think it's going to be about like real epistemological differences or moral differences in a kind of fun. I mean, maybe sexual morality to some degree, but I think even that will be largely overcome. I think there's going to be like a gay Marjorie Taylor Greene. There's going to be a transsexual Marjorie Taylor Greene, if there isn't already one. So I think even those like sexual morality things are going to be kind of overcome on some level. But I just think it's going to be really shrill, and Trump kind of like launched a trend, but I think he was really following a trend. And so it's not going to be about things. We're going to deal with an empire that is objectively declining and coming under pressure. And within that, we're going to be fighting in just really extreme ways, and culture war stuff. Mainly, I don't think there's going to be like landmark legislation. In some ways, the polarization prevents that, because you can present something like fairly reasonable, like Medicare for all. Why are you guys against that? You love Medicare. Why don't you love this? But they will attack it as literal communism or as like woke fascism or whatever term they're going to use, and they will probably successfully prevent it. So I think you might be giving short shrift to a one-party state, to be honest.
Personally, I really don't want to live under one party system, regardless of how their views align with mine. Just like, with your my apologies, I'm drinking right now, but but yeah, like, dude, think about it. Like, there has to be, like a difference of opinion, like
there doesn't have to be, and I don't think opinions actually differ that much in the way that you think. I think there's a kind of cultural civil war going on. But if you actually press people on their like basic conception of good and evil and right and wrong, and what does it mean to be a person, and what does it mean, even what does it kind of mean to be an American, I think there's actually a tremendous amount of overlap.
Yeah.
And again, I don't say that as someone who agrees with them on any of those issues. But anyway, let's move on.
Okay, sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment. So I just let some new people in, but I'm going to go back. So Darko 5%.
Hello.
Hey.
First of all, I just want to say, Richard, I am representing the 5% as well as Suplex City. My good friend Sensei could not be here. He's currently catching some bass. He had to leave a little early.
Okay.
But anyways, man, I have a couple questions for you. The first question is not as important, you could say, but I just want to know, are you planning on debating my good friend Timmy MAGA Eagle Patriot sometime soon?
Yes. Well, he is quite a patriot.
Yes.
I think it would be fun to do that. I've already accepted it, but someone needs to like actually host it. But that would be pretty wild.
He's coming for you, man. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I hope he doesn't die of a ivermectin.
Yes, I think he's
in
still in ICU. Unfortunately, unfortunately,
okay.
but Anyway.
Okay. Well, maybe to make things fair, I would take horse dewormer, and then he obviously is taking horse
Yes.
dewormer. It's his main source of nutrition. And so that would just kind of make the debate fair and maybe more interesting for the
Absolutely.
audience.
That's very gracious of you. I mean, I know you're a Democrat and all, but that is quite gracious. Anyways,
Right. It's pronounced demon rat.
I like to say
demon rat.
Democrat,
Yeah.
but with 3 Ks. So, because they're the real racists, as we all know.
All right. I'll move on. So I'll just go down the list. I'll knock these guys off, and then I'll go back up. So King Bear.
So about the like the Daily Stormer like stuff, Andrew Anglin. I think like do you think that like the troll culture, like the do you think that's like the that's like the main reason the alt-right's still alive? Because like the movement's kind of, in my opinion, is dead, and I think that like the Daily Stormer and like Groypers, whatever, I think they're the only like thing keeping the movement alive, just the troll culture. I think that's probably why.
Yeah.
It's like, do you think that's the reason? That's why it's still alive, and like.
Yeah, I think that's why you can still call it a movement, and I think otherwise it's going to be a lot like it was, say, 10 years ago, where you have small people doing some work, and a small amount of people doing interesting work, on the best occasions. But I do think that those gave us made it a kind of movement, and I think we kind of hit the ceiling of what a trolling, digital movement can be. And we hit the ceiling a while ago, and I think something like the Groypers was just kind of like a late stage expression of the alt-right. And it was funny. Mark Brahman and I we were talking one day. We visited. I had not visited the Daily Stormer website for years. I mean, I never read it regularly, but I don't think I'd visited for, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years. And I was just curious. I was like, what are they up to? What are the things that are important to them? And they seem to have moved away from discussions of race. They've definitely moved away from like identifying as the alt-right. I mean, that's long dead. And it was entirely about vaccinations and masks. And they didn't seem to have dropped anti-Semitism. They still had some, the typical memes, and they seem to kind of be blaming this on the Jews in some way. But they had just gone full like MAGA-tard.
Yep.
And it was all about vaccination masks, to the point where, there was a little more spice thrown in there and things that were, strange. But if you were maybe this is what they're trying to do. If you were a hardcore Marjorie Taylor Greene supporter who thinks that, mass totalitarianism is here and vaccinations are going to kill everyone or whatever, like, you would go to that site and be like, oh, these guys are great. And I don't know. I mean, it also, it was interesting. I don't even quite know what to make of it, but I just think we hit the ceiling on a troll movement. I mean, it's deplatforming affects that. These things just lose steam after a while. And I think also a troll movement that's not seen as winning just becomes something that can be like, almost like justifiably snuffed out. I mean, if the troll movement is behind Trump and it's kind of mostly fun, and there's a kind of the attitude of a bully, like, we're winning whether you like it or not, and we're going forward. That's one thing. But when you're clearly not winning and you're just engaging in like shrill and even more extreme attacks on anything that the government does, it just, or you're just attacking female journalists or whatever, it just becomes like, what the hell is this thing? Like, what do you even believe in?
I think it's just a way for like neckbeards that never leave their mom's basement to like be a dick without having to go outside, really.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on. So you guys can all stay in. Okay, so I'll do Brendan, and then I'll go back up and I'll get to Roberto. I guess that's his name. So Brendan.
Hello.
Carol X or Shulman X. Brendan first. Yes. Hi. Yeah.
I'm going to make a quick statement about something Gay Partisan said, and then I'll make a few more statements leading up to my question, if that's okay.
Okay. Sure.
So, with regards to a one-party system, every circle has one center. The gravity only goes in one direction. There's nothing in this universe or reality that has a multi-party system, unless you're schizophrenic. Americans live under a one-party liberal state since 1776. If they replaced it with another one-party system, it might sound scary to them, but they'd get used to it. So that's that with Gay Partisan. Now, moving on to my other statements. I don't know how many people here are into or look at the news of high fashion, arts, culture, and cinema. But in Venice, there's the Venice Film Festival '78. It was a busy week. I believe they had a Dolce & Gabbana show. Celebrities were there, including a woman named Katie Spencer. She has exactly your eyes, Richard. But with this film festival going on, there's, of course, Kristen Stewart. She's making that, acting as Princess Diana Spencer, which I'm sure Richard would love to see. And, of course, the movie that I was going to bring up was Dune, October 22nd.
Yeah.
Timothée Chalamet, Zendaya, Dave Bautista, his crew, all of them were there for the screening. And this brings me to the point of the movie, which was the Christos Haderach, the savior of the entire galaxy. It's not a made-up word. It's based on a Hebrew word called Kefitzat Haderach. That means shortening of the path between two distances. It's a sort of miracle. And I was wondering if the author, Frank Herbert, wrote the series. If he spent years on this, I was wondering, it came to my mind recently that he may have wanted to summon one, and so he wrote it as a fictional series that maybe, just like J.R.R. Tolkien, Frank Herbert grew up in a society where he felt trapped by his values, but he wanted to find a way to escape them, so he did it through fiction and wrote a story about a man who would take control of himself and the known world. And also from that, I was thinking, do you think that Frank Herbert was trying to summon that type of man, and do you expect to see that type of man in your lifetime? Because I think the only two that existed in our recorded history are Julius Caesar and Saul of Tarsus. Those are the only two men who have changed the paradigm of anything. I mean, we live in both of the worlds.
A lot of fascinating things there. I can talk about Dune a little bit and answer the question. What were you said? Are you just suggesting there's a kind of happy coincidence of all of these Spencer things coinciding?
No, that was just the story.
I did notice that. I don't know who Katie Spencer is, or Kathy Spencer, or whatever.
K-I-T.
Okay.
I'm just saying they kind of, if there's a Spencer out there, they have your eyes.
Yeah. So in terms of Dune, so what's interesting about Dune is that when David Lynch made his film, which I actually like, I know it gets a lot of hell, and David Lynch himself has kind of disowned it. It's visually really great, and I think it's also kind of so just it is trying to represent, to get to the heart of the novel, kind of unsuccessfully, but it's trying genuinely, and it is also kind of so outlandish and maybe even awkward at moments that it's kind of just a fun film. I've rewatched it a number of times. One interesting thing about it is that David Lynch depicted Paul as an actual Messiah. And one maybe underappreciated aspect of the book, and we'll see if this is represented in the upcoming Denis Villeneuve film, is that it's part of a missionary productiva by the Bene Gesserit sisterhood. So they have implanted in Irakis, this very clearly kind of Judeo-Christian or Islamic, I guess, Abrahamic myth system that a Messiah will come. And the way it's depicted is that that's almost done kind of cynically as a way of, we could, if this planet ever becomes ungovernable or we run into problems, we can kind of call upon this thing. So it's about kind of planting a seed and expecting it to grow centuries later. And so there's a kind of, I don't know, layer of irony to like Paul's existence as a Messiah that I don't think that David Lynch really obscured in his movie, because he was trying to create literal Jesus, you could say. The other thing about Frank Herbert himself is that when he made public statements, there's actually a good interview of Frank Herbert done, I think, with Bryant Gumbel on the Today Show, and he said that Dune is written as a cautionary tale. Be careful of charismatic leaders, because at the end of the day, Paul leads to a global jihad done by the Fremen that leads to the death of billions of people. And Frank Herbert kind of presents himself as kind of liberal leaning, because he's obviously an environmentalist, and that's clear in Dune as well. But kind of libertarian type. We shouldn't make gods out of politicians, and beware of the really charismatic ones in particular. But you could read that, and he did say those things, and he's not lying exactly, but I think you could read that as a certain kind of cover story, or maybe the fact that he didn't quite understand himself, and that you don't, even if you depict the mass violence that might come from a figure like Paul, if you're going to spend this amount of time writing a book that's this grand, you love it at some level, and you think that the modern world might need something like this. I mean, I would, in terms of whether we are leading towards that type of figure, I would say the answer is yes, and that it's really in the increasing massification of society that we could get the grand tyrant of the lengths that Nietzsche imagined. And that for a grand tyrant to arise, you need a lot more slaves. So you can't quite have a grand tyrant in a different society where there are too many classes and so on, and there's too many divisions, too many locations of relative power. But in a kind of massification of the world, following the end of the American era, I think we might be set up for a kind of, like, the world will be unified, it will be homogenized, kind of dumbed down, if you want to say, where everyone's eating the same food and watching the same television and playing on the same smartphone, etc., where it's almost the only way out, the only way to unify that is through a type of messianic figure. I can see that happening. I look at that with a lot of dread, but I don't think it's that outlandish to say that kind of after the end of history that something like that will rise. I think it's very clear that secular atheist types like myself, I fear that we aren't going to be the people who will be able to generate a unifying myth. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't try or we shouldn't think on those terms, but I do think that the kind of like rising atheism or the rising apathy, which is increasing, like a lot of, religious people have more children than secular people, no question. But there's still this just rising godlessness, just this death of God is just sweeping the planet. I think that a situation like that, particularly once expectations for higher living standards decrease, that you have a kind of massification of the human race that will be ripe for a global unification under a messianic type figure.
Can I push back on that?
Sure.
Against me or Spencer?
Of the idea of like a mass. The one thing I'm pointing out, like you've made the point of that you'd have like a more, I don't want to say globalization is not the right term, but more homogenization of the world. To me, it seems as if the U.S. declines, the U.S. empire really declines, you will actually see less of that homogenization, because it's a simple fact that the U.S. empire is keeping the ceilings open and has been for the past 75 years. I mean, a lot of Americans don't know this, but like most of their outsourcing to like East Asia, among other places, is in fact a result of the U.S. holding the ceilings open. But that's another issue. And so I see that the U.S. really declines over, say, the next few decades, maybe eventually pulls out of a lot of places. I would see homogenization actually decreasing, and you would see a lot of indigenous, if I use that term, indigenous forces start to rekindle themselves.
I think that's a very more than fair perspective. I would just counter that we've already gone through the kind of psychological and in many ways like physical and biological homogenization into just a one human type. And we've passed through a point where someone of a higher class would look down upon a peasant and say, like, you're of a different race, effectively. That
Horatius described something very interesting. The same thing that you brought up about balkanization or a society breaking up and not being unified, that's the exact same window that a grand tyrant would use to unify people.
Yeah, there's
before something breaks apart, you have the small window to make it bigger than it ever was before.
It's Aristotle's life of governments. It's monarchy, then to democracy, then to oligarchy, then to anarchy, and then back to monarchy, which is basically what you're kind of getting at.
And as for the death of God, yes, he has died. He's been dead for a long time. But when there's a tsunami, the water gets low before the wave comes. The death of God precedes the birth of God. And the birth of this new type of God-man is not going to be anything like Christ. It will be the opposite, and the world will have summoned him.
That's a fascinating. I love that term. Before the tsunami, the water goes down. That's a really good way to put it. We don't know what's coming next. It'll be big, of course. I like that. I'm going to use that in the future.
Oh, feel free.
Yeah, I think you're speaking in poetic terms, but I think you're speaking in very insightful terms, and it's how I think in many ways. I say this as someone who is involved in a Apollonian project in which we do want gods to return that are very different and that preceded the Christian God, both Yahweh and Jesus, however he's conceived. So that is what someone like myself would want, and it will be something new, even though it's old. It's not quite a return to tradition in the sense that it would be such a return that it would be something extremely fresh and new. That being said, I always try to stay critical and based in reality. And Judeo-Christianity has just had such an impact on the psychology. It's had an impact even on who breeds and who doesn't, who succeeds and who doesn't at the game of life, that I wonder if there's maybe just through a residual force or something that there will be a kind of recognizably kind of Abrahamic conception, whether it's a new Jesus or maybe a new Muhammad or something. I wonder if that will happen. I mean, obviously we don't know. We can have a discussion about this, but no one can say this for certain. But I don't know. I look at the world and most people, and they're just kind of passive nihilism in the face of what's happening. And I wonder if they're really ready for the type of deity that could put the world on a new footing and kind of bring us to a new place.
That type of deity will know what to do, and he's ready to do it. That's all I can say.
That's true.
So basically, it's going to be like when Constantine converted to Christianity, but Joe Biden is going to have a vision of Apollo, and he's going to declare Apolloism as the official religion. We just don't know it yet.
What has happened before can happen again.
Yes. I mean, you say, obviously your tongue is in your cheek, but literally stranger things have happened than that. Okay. I will go to, who have I not gotten here? I guess Stephen J, anime avatar. I'm letting some more people in too. Do you want to speak?
Steven, go off. Steven, it's your turn, buddy.
If you don't want to speak, that's okay. Why don't we go to Stan? You have the red pill and blue pill avatar. You can speak if you like. All right. Having one of these moments on talk radio.
Hello?
Pepe. Yes, who is this?
Bardamu.
Okay. Well, you have the floor.
Yes, I am a foreigner, and to me it seems to be quite little coverage about the recall election in California, which is happening now. And I have a theory about this, because most of the dissident right are usually quite sympathetic to they are like anti-vaxxers and such, and and they have to like take the side of someone like Larry Elder and the transvestite Caitlyn against the white man who is a Democrat, and that's sort of like bad optics. So I think that they are not
the white man with a large, beautiful white family as well.
Yes, exactly.
It's interesting.
It's very interesting. So, what are your thoughts about this election that's coming up? And
I think the current polling suggests that Gavin Newsom might survive by the skin of his teeth, but it will be pretty dramatic. Like if he does survive, it's going to be like 55-45 or something, which when you think about recalling a governor, particularly when he's running for re-election the next year, that's pretty dramatic. I think I suggested earlier, I just felt that he was going to lose because he was getting a lot of left-wing antagonism. I even saw like the Young Turks endorse the recall and things like that. And I was just thinking, wow, if he can't unify his own base, he's going to have a really hard time. And but I think I might have jumped the gun. I think he might escape. We'll see. But in terms of describing Gavin Newsom himself, he is an expression of the suburban white professional that is leaving the Republican Party, kind of their natural party, the party of wealth and privilege and Episcopalianism. They're leaving that and they're becoming Democrats. So the long-term dissident right narrative of the GOP is going to be the white party and then there's going to be the rest or whatever, I think is just fundamentally flawed. What's happening is that the GOP actually is slowly but surely getting more diverse, and the party of the rest, the Star Wars cantina, wherever it was colorfully described, is actually going to have a lot more successful white people in it, and there is this division. When white nationalists who kind of instinctively go to the GOP and say, "Oh, this is the party for white people," I get that on some level, but you're going with a particular type of white person. There are other white people who are successfully navigating this new world who are making a different choice. You're not necessarily in support of whites or something. And it's not all just traitors or lunatics or woke communists as well. It's a lot of people who actually live out what you might call Christian values. That is, they have a housewife, they have a picket fence place in the suburbs, but they have made a very different choice, and one that you're going to feel is just radically antagonistic. And I think this is a kind of expression of that. The fact that Caitlyn Jenner might be the most famous person who's running, I don't think Caitlyn Jenner is getting anywhere close to what she needs to get to win. But the person is this just kind of, like discount Ben Thomas Sowell type, this just long-term conservative grifter, he's our black friend type guy of the conservative movement, that you're putting your faith behind that. I think it actually is a sign of times to come, and it's also a kind of sign of the reality going on in the two-party system. All right, let's go with who hasn't spoken yet. James, you can go. And also, if you've spoken, you can maybe request not to speak so that other people can get in. I have a number of requests here, so you can kind of give the mic to other people. It doesn't mean you're leaving the space. And if you want to get back in, you can just request again a little bit later. So I would suggest that some people do that. Josh Neal wants to get in. Carol X wants to get in. One Tall wants to get in, but I can't let them in at the moment. Oh, there. Okay, you guys obeyed. Thanks. All right, let's go for it. Who did I? James. Yeah, you can go.
Hi, am I coming through all right?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yes, I hear you.
Awesome. So you said on a space recently something to the effect of Apolloism is not a revealed religion, seeming that you have an anti kind of revelation position. I guess my question is, what is that phenomenon to you, and what place or position would that type of experience or consciousness hold in your idyllic future state?
Are you talking about what is my conception of a revealed religion, or what is a non-revealed religion?
Well, that's a good specification. Well, I guess my question is, what is happening in your mind? What is happening to someone who is claiming to have something revealed to them or perceives themselves in a state of revelation, whatever that type of consciousness is? What do you consider that to be? What phenomenon is happening there, and how? Yeah, to the point you just made, what does a non-revealed religion look like?
Okay, I think you can look back at a revealed religion is going to have on some level a prophet or a text, and that these are going to be the voices of God being transmitted to us. So Christians believe that the Bible, from the Pentateuch through Revelations, was written by God, though it was touched by human hands. It was transmitted from the one true God, and he did this without changing the personality of the author. So even though I would assume most all Christians, believe that there are different styles in effect in the Bibles, that you can date them to certain times, they would say that it's still transmitted in that way. So you can conceivably have a kind of sola scriptura movement where you can say, we need to go back to the original text. You can conceivably have a new prophet who becomes a voice of God and gives you the one true way. In terms of a non-revealed religion, it would be something. I mean, there obviously has to be a starting point somewhere. And even though Hesiod and others might have been, their writing might have been viewed as like quasi-divine. It was not quasi-divine in the sense of the Pentateuch or the Gospels. Or excuse me, it was not divine in the sense of the Pentateuch or the Gospels. It was a way of an artist to deal with mythic forces that might be viewed as kind of superhuman actors, or as kind of primordial principles. like Venus, a principle of love and eroticism and libido and desire that kind of emerged from the waves and takes different forms. So, when we're publishing Mark's stuff, and I don't mean this at all as a criticism, we have zero desire for this to be treated as one would treat the gospel. That is holy writ, or the Constitution. That is holy writ and something that is unchanging and should never be changed, and so on. It is a perspective on myths that recur and resonate in different ways throughout human history. But it's also kind of pragmatically speaking, it's a way of applying these primordial principles to daily life and seeing avatars, again, pragmatically addressing where we are now, but never doing that, never being beholden to just one text as the one true way that can never be questioned or anything like that. Is that good enough? Okay. Let's go to James got his request. James, would you like to speak?
Yeah, sorry about that. I was having a little bit of a connection issue. I guess I'm thinking of the gentleman's name escapes me, but he was one of the two guys. Maybe it was Francis Crick that came up with the structure of the double helix for the DNA. I mean, I'm almost
Watson
or Crick. I think it was whoever was responsible. I'm almost inclined to view that discovery at the fact that quasi
Are you guys there? Do you hear me?
I can hear you.
I can hear you.
Okay, sorry. We lost. Do you want to reiterate that, Josh? You were talking about Watson and Crick.
He disconnected.
Okay. What was he saying? Does anyone remember?
Can't remember. It was like broken up, like bad signal.
Ah, so he was breaking up too. Okay.
Can I just ask you, Richard? I was going to pose a question to you, but you're talking about Apolloism.
Yeah.
So why not Christianity? Or like, do you? I'm not trying to pose this question, but maybe Christianity is the answer. It's worked for our grandparents and their grandparents, and it's had different conceptions throughout the late modern age and the early modern age and the medieval period. And so I'll just maybe throw this question to you.
Did it work for them?
I would say the evidence is clear. I mean, it's not a perfect world. It never has been. But in a way, what more do you want? Or what evidence would you have that it didn't work?
Well, yeah. I mean,
I know these are rhetorical questions, but whatever.
Yeah, I mean, the initiation of Christianity coincided with the end of the ancient world, a totally new psychological conception, and a period of 1,000 years that, while colorful and fascinating, is aptly termed the Dark Ages. What people like about, say, Europe and so on, and that is genuinely inspiring, also coincided with an active rediscovery of the ancient world and an attempt to meld the two. Christianity remains the world's most popular religion, the largest, and the institutions have billions of dollars, and they seem curiously impotent in the face of the advance of liberalism, if we want to just use that word as a catch-all, and the putting our people and our civilization and culture into peril of the worst kind. So, a very different story could be told about the last 2,000 years. And one of the reasons why I don't think Christianity is the answer is that I have always taken it seriously. I don't want to just gloss over what Jesus said and meant, and what these types of worldviews entail, even if most all Christians are pretty hazy on it, and even if there are kind of some countervailing forces and so on. I want to hold it to its own account. I also don't believe that the liberalism as a kind of, again, liberalism can mean a lot of different things. I actually just started a book, interesting. I believe her name is Rosenblatt, History of Liberalism. But liberalism can mean a lot of different things. And there are, racist liberals like Voltaire. There are liberals who are tolerant, liberals who are intolerant, liberals who are pro-Christian, liberals who are anti-Christian, of course. But that basic root conception of a universalism and individualism, I don't think that can exist outside of Christianity. I would take the view that liberalism emerged from Christianity. And so all of these so-called traditionalists who are, claiming that the only way to defeat liberalism is to revive Christianity or something like that, I think they're just absolutely missing the point.
So,
and I take Christianity seriously, and I don't view it as just kind of like, this is our religion.
Well, okay, but okay, can I just
go ahead?
Well, isn't that what Protestants have done since the Reformation? Is like there's 1,000 different denominations, and to them, the Bible says like this is God's one true church, and isn't that what Christians kind of do? Is almost what you're reluctant to do?
What, to split off and change?
Yeah, like you look at all these different Protestant sects. Well, the Catholics did this too. They were the one true church, but all these different sects, they used their Christian faith in the Bible to create their own little paradise.
Well,
I think that is what's happening. But sorry.
Okay, I hear you, but it's your own little paradise, confined within walls. There's differences between Presbyterians and Baptists and Episcopalians and so on, but they actually agree on quite a bit. And I think from the perspective of 2021, we see a lot of these differences between Christians as rather trivial and as maybe class-based or accidental even. If you pressed a Southern Baptist to say, why are you a Southern Baptist and not a Presbyterian? Could they give you an answer that isn't, well, I liked this pastor and this is where my parents went? Which is a perfectly fine answer on some level, but there's no real division. Those are all confined within a stream.
Right. No, I'm not arguing that point. But I do want to take issue with like liberalism being the fault of Christianity. The way I view European history, it's everything came out of Christianity. And I do take issue with people who don't credit Christianity for, like, in a way, everything. And I don't know if you think I'm not being fair, but
I think you're being extremely unfair. Did the institution of marriage come out of Christianity?
no, so I wouldn't say it that way, but that.
Okay, so not everything.
Right. Okay, so I'm not.
Did the Latin language come out of Christianity?
No, that came before Christianity.
Okay.
Okay, so so I'm not saying this correctly, but I think since about 500, the last 1,000 years, Christianity has been very, very, very dominant in European history.
Yes.
And so,
no question.
To some extent, all the achievements that white people have had for the last 1,000 years has been intertwined with Christianity.
Would you say that we just couldn't have had feminism without Christianity?
We couldn't have had feminism without Christianity. I mean, feminism has...
Well, what I don't like about this argument is that people want to take credit for things in many ways that Christianity did not invent, like the institution of marriage, for one, or the Latin language, or European representational art, or etc. They want to take credit for that. But then they want to say that the Christianity is founded on, or excuse me, Western civilization is founded on Christianity, like Pat Buchanan would say. But then they don't want to, they want to escape blame for something like feminism or liberalism or democracy or whatever. They want to be like, well, that's not Christian, but everything else that's good is Christian. It's a kind of cafeteria style, choose your own adventure type way of doing things. I, again, just take Christianity more seriously. I do think that there's an ancient modern distinction. It's not where the Straussians made it. I think the ancient modern distinction really does occur at the end of the ancient world, and it might actually be started with the translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek. And the ancient world did end. There is an ancient modern distinction, and within the modern distinction, the Christian worldview is it. And so, like, if you want to take credit for, St. Peter's Basilica or something, and say that's, oh, Christians did that, you've also got to take credit for feminism. So, I mean, you kind of can't have it both ways.
So I don't want to dominate this conversation too much. I know I am a little bit.
Okay.
I just think what you're trying to do with Apolloism, I feel like you could do that with Christianity. I don't want to just discount the trajectory that's been for the last 60 years. I see that more as something that we have to overcome and that we can overcome. So yeah, I don't know what else to say.
Okay, that's fair enough. Okay, Kloitskin wanted to jump in here. I bet he has something to say about this.
Yeah. So on this topic, just a heads up, I'm Roman Catholic, so obviously I'm Christianity's defense on this issue.
You want to strangle the last Apolloist with the entrails of the last atheist, isn't that?
Yeah, I want to the Dominican treatment, just light them up. Yeah. So I would agree with you, actually, that I think Christianity is kind of a but-for cause of liberalism. That were it not for the Christian historical context, modern Western liberalism, wherever you want to date that to, the 17th century or the 19th century, that would be inconceivable. That obviously, liberalism did not emerge from a Hindu or Shinto culture, and we could get into like the reasons why that might be. I think that Charles Taylor has like a very interesting interpretation in The Secular Age about Augustine's emphasis on conscience and interiority, and introspection.
I just bought that book. It is now in my library, and it's scaring me how many pages it contains. But go ahead.
Yeah, it's good. I have some negative opinions of Charles Taylor, but I think he's an interesting. His book on Hegel is quite good. Yeah. Even though it's hated by Hegel scholars today, but yeah, I mean, I think that Christianity is bound up with a certain kind of individualism and emphasis on subjective interiority that lends itself to liberalism. So I would agree with that. Or I shouldn't say lends itself to liberalism, but without that context, liberalism would not be conceivable. But what I find kind of puzzling about this argument, which is one that you present, but a lot of kind of neo-pagan elements of the distant right argue as well, is that liberalism is kind of the natural, perhaps even inevitable consequence of Christianity. And it seems like Christianity is, like, by its nature, such a kind of broad and internally heterogeneous kind of religious backdrop that I worry if it ends up either being kind of like trivial observation in the same sense that, like, Western culture is the backdrop of Christianity, of liberalism, or like the specific kind of genetic account or genealogical account of liberalism. Like, I'm not sure what Christian tenets we're picking out here. Is it like the universalism, the individualism, kind of aesthetic drive of Christianity?
I would say those. I mean, I think in Russell's, like, history of Western philosophy, he says something where when you're reading Marx, you need this dictionary. And when he says, I forgot exactly what these were, but when he says proletariat, you should think Jesus. When he says Yahweh, you should think capital. When he says the priesthood of all, you should think the Communist Party. Like, he had a kind of gloss where he was showing that Marxism has this deeply Judeo-Christian structure. And I might have gotten some of those wrong. I'm just going off the top of my head. But what he's, I think, accurately saying is that there is a kind of Judeo-Christian structure to Marxism that you can't really fully understand it without that. And that doesn't mean that he isn't, like, wildly divergent from this or that early father or church father, or that he isn't misrepresenting the base message of Jesus and Luke or something. That's fair, but a Christianity did emerge that at the very least kind of structured thought going forward. And so you kind of can't have Marx without Jesus on some level.
Yeah, I guess if I could just clarify the question. I mean, I would totally agree with you on that. I guess my question is, do you think that there's a kind of necessary logic of ideas by which Christianity had to evolve into this, liberal or humanist 19th century project? Or do you think this is kind of a historical accident that, we very well could have had some kind of conservative Calvinist America not have become this, like, liberal monstrosity?
I would probably go on the necessary logical evolution. Yes. I agree. It's a kind of difficult question and it's a kind of bold answer, but yeah, it is what it is. It ended up this way. Therefore, there's no real alternative. And it ended up this way in a logical path. And even if we're not quite able to grasp it, that just means that we're not grasping it.
Okay, interesting.
There's no alternative. There's no multiverse, and this is it. But extremely good question. Okay, Carol X, do you want to hop in? Oh, Roberto is back, but Carol X, you go first, and then I'll go to Roberto.
Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So I'm just, like, chiming in. I was kind of, like, scrolling through my feed, so I'm not really sure what you guys were talking about, but so I just wanted to kind of give, like, my thoughts about something. So I'm from Fort Worth, Texas. I guess Fort Worth, Dallas area, right?
Yeah.
And I always thought, like, one of the problems with America growing up there as a white girl, I guess, and I was with a single mom. My father had some mental health issues, so I was raised with a single mom. So I kind of had to fend for myself a little bit there, and I always thought one of the issues with America was that in the South, the men, not even considering my dad, because like I said, he had some issues, but I always thought like one of the issues was the mentality of the Southern Baptist, this kind of like non-confrontational, very um, almost timid. I mean, they're supposed to be like these Christian men, but they were so timid,
Hmm.
and it just almost invited these like it almost invited these illegal immigration from across the border, like are we like they like the men in the South, they relied on the law to do the enforcement. And now that they don't have that because of Black Lives Matter, I kind of wonder like what is their game plan, because they're not going to do anything about it. They're not going to say anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
I mean,
I'm
I
just
can
like,
answer this. I know where you're going.
yeah,
Look, even if you have met timid Southern Baptists, I bet you could find plenty of examples of robust, manly man Southern Baptist types. And faulting them for like relying on the law, I think is rather unfair. I mean, I rely on the law. I don't patrol the streets at night and check people's papers, and I'm not authorized to do that, even if I wanted
no,
to.
yeah. I mean,
I
obviously
think what you're getting at is
that.
something
Yeah, but
real.
that's what I'm saying. We rely on the law. That was our
Yeah,
that
but
was
that's
our
like you're gonna rely on someone else to do these things. It's there are very rare instances where you're like a pioneering homesteader in
yeah.
Arizona territory and like you are the law, like in the searchers or something where
No,
you
I
know
get what you're saying.
it's just
I do. I get what you're saying. But there is also these cultural buffers. Like you're in the street and someone says, "Hey, don't do that. You don't do that." People in the South, they're not confrontational like that. You know what I mean? They're
well, yeah, okay, I get what you're saying, but I could probably find a lot of counterexamples to that. The
yeah.
way I would answer this is that there really are class distinctions that I think the dissident right or the alt right or whatever neglects in its emphasis on race, and that's not really the place for that type of person who is a low church Protestant to be setting the agenda. And I don't think he wants to. And I think in many ways they're kind of a bit suspicious of people who do want to. There's a suspicion of intellectuals, maybe a
Yeah.
healthy one, of like, you're fruity or artsy fartsy or whatever. But I think there's also a suspicion of intellectuals who have a political vision and they see really any vision as antagonistic to some kind of mythos of the family out in the frontier. What is it, My Little Prairie, or what was it, Little House on the Prairie, My Little Pony, Little House on the Prairie. And yeah, I think they're just suspicious of people who have a vision beyond that, but I don't really expect that vision from them. I think that there are certain class types that take certain positions of leadership, and what you have to ask is like, who is in charge? Could there be a different type of white than most of the people that we know and love in Dallas Fort Worth, uh, who can be a good leadership class and a kind of golden soul type of person? And do we need that? And do we kind of have a bad leadership class? But even if we admit that there's of course we have a bad leadership class, but that doesn't mean that all forms of leadership or class distinctions are thus wrong or
Yeah.
irrelevant or
Well,
something.
yeah, I mean, the paradox is that these people are very kind people. You would want to be ruled by these people, but at the same time, they don't have
Would you?
I mean, they don't have
I think
the
if they listen to 10 minutes of this Twitter space, they might be like, yeah, we're going to shut that thing down.
yeah, I mean, yeah, they would. They would
They're like, this has gone on long enough, and this is just not doing any good for anyone. So I'm sorry. We all love free speech, but it has its limits.
But I mean, I don't understand. Like, I mean, it's Texas. You got like the governor. He's like, yeah, we're gonna send the National Guard down to the border, blah blah blah. But like there is a culture there where they don't stand up for themselves. I'm sorry, they don't. They let themselves be bullied. I just there's and but the like I was what I wanted to get to is also you like that was my thoughts about like the South maybe, and then I always thought like maybe the Midwest was pretty polite like Canada or something, and I always thought like the Northeast they were kind of rude and but I mean get to the Northeast and it's basically I mean they're more leaning towards socialism. I mean so it's just like you can't figure it out. Like it's like I don't understand. I don't get it. So
yeah, there are definitely regional types. All right, Robert or Roberto, you are up. Oh, let me. I'll have to add him in. There you go. You're up, and I'll go to William Sutton next. Robert?
Richard,
yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, great. How's it going?
It's going well.
I think we met before. You did the interview with Maheen on Sultans of Sneakers.
Oh, okay. I've done a lot of interviews, but go ahead.
No, I just was wondering a couple of questions. What was the feedback from the interview? I don't know if you remember it. It was with the Bengali Muslim guy.
Oh, that one. I didn't get a lot of. I remember that one distinctly because that was an unusual conversation. I didn't get a lot of feedback on my end, and if anyone gave me feedback, it was like, "Oh, great conversation, cool." But it didn't make waves on my end. I don't think anyone was offended by the idea that I was talking in a respectful manner with a Muslim. From what I understand, he got a lot of negative feedback.
Yeah, he sure did.
So it's one of these kind of weird ways where the so-called racist are actually more tolerant than the people of color, you could say. So I would definitely do that again, and I would love to do interviews like that. It was really enlightening. And one of the things that I like about Twitter Spaces is that there's not, anyone can jump in here, and I have had people. I've had a few people who wanted to troll me or whatever, but most people, if you're going to speak up, you want to ask a question, and that's a lot different than say going on a podcast with Richard Spencer or inviting Richard Spencer to your podcast. So I think it kind of like lowers the bar and makes things a little more relaxed. So I hope, because we have 200 people listening. If I do these, it might get more than, it might grow. And I think a lot of these conversations that we're not having, elsewhere we can have here. I mean, even some of the things we've delved into just in this, past hour or so have been rather wild. So yeah, I would love to talk to more Muslims who want to, lend a sympathetic ear, find common ground, or at least have a discussion that isn't a shouting match.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in a precarious position, as you know, being the front man for Islam Europeans.
Yeah.
So it's either it's funny because it's almost like the decelerationist are on my side and the accelerationists are against us.
Interesting.
Because it's almost like you have the on the I guess the anti-Islam right.
Yeah.
They can't stand the idea. Like they just think that any of this can happen. Then on the extreme left, they're kind of in agreement. So it's almost like we're getting these people who, if they met in an elevator, it would turn into a brawl in 5 minutes, advocating for just stop this.
Yeah. I really have to say, I did a little response to this really stupid article that came out in the New York Times today. I to be honest, I don't even want to talk about it because it's just doesn't interest me in any ways. But I did do a little response to it. But yeah, I it is funny because it is painful when you come across people who want to misrepresent you and just want to shut you down, who think it's like really funny if you are going to starve to death. That would make their day. It's kind of that level of antagonism. And I get it on some level, but there is just something like profoundly evil and just distasteful about those types of people. And they are out there, but I definitely don't think they're in your community. Well, there might be some, but I think most of we've had brief conversations and things like that. I think there are a lot of people in your community and probably the mainstream who don't want to engage in that kind of zero sum game where I win, you lose, and they actually are interested and say, well, let's see where the differences are, let's hash it out, or let's see where the common ground is, etc. And that's very rewarding.
Yeah, no, for sure. I completely agree. And I guess and everyone knows my positions. I mean, I follow mainstream Islam, but being a European descendant convert, like I have a responsibility to be a good member of my own European community, and that's.
I remember reading somewhere that.
Is there an echo?
Oh, sorry, Josh. Do you want to speak? Here, I can unmute you. Sorry. You can chime in here, Josh, if you'd like. I can hear you now. You roboted there for a moment.
Yeah, something funky is happening with my connection. If I just robot out or drop out, just kick me. I won't take it personally.
Okay.
I remember reading, I think it was Watson claimed that he got the idea of the double helical structure in some kind of like hallucinatory state. I've read similar things about Darwin, that some of his key insights came through kind of a non-rational means. If you want to look at the arts, filmmaking, Tarkovsky, I think, is another example of someone who kind of has a mystical bent to what he does. I guess I'm just, the question I'm getting at is, because I've seen Mark and some Apollo people make, and you as well, make comments about resisting superstitio and mysticism and things like that. And I guess I was just curious, like, what place do you see that type of consciousness having in your, conception of a idyllic religious state?
Well, I think we want to resist superstition in the sense that we want to resist something that's like a mystery cult, where there are shapes and forms on stage and you have no real access to what they are doing. And in some ways, not what you do. I think at the very least, we should be, highly critical of contemporary mystery cults of that nature. But in terms of like arriving at beautiful art or even scientific conceptions or so on through visions or whatever, I think you're setting up like a false dilemma in many ways. So if we look at scientific studies of the brain and decision making, we reach a terrifying conclusion that free will does not exist, that your higher level mind is rationalizing decisions that are already made. And so when you think through a problem, you have already reached a decision and you are rationalizing it to yourself. And so your free will, your perception of consciousness or free will is just your perception of like explaining things to yourself. And the actual, if you want to say decision or actual insight or so on, might have been cogitated on a level of the brain that isn't quite conscious. But I think I would separate that kind of that distinction I made from like a distinction between a mystery cult religion or a of whatever variety, and superstition in that way. But I would say that Mark and I probably have a kind of ideal of a certain degree of realism, that we aren't waiting for a savior or some mystical force to arrive and rescue us. That we can only get out of this mess by really engaging with it and like seeing it clearly and using our critical faculty on it. So I would make those distinctions. But yeah, in terms of like, a mysterious poet or whatever, I mean, none of that is, or even a scientist who kind of reaches an insight, at 2 a.m. and he wakes up and he has a eureka moment. I mean, I don't think Mark or really any reasonable person would be opposed to that or think that that isn't real on some level.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
I remember a friend of mine was, have you heard of this theory of like the bicameral mind?
Yes, Julian Jaynes. He was a playwright before he was a psychologist.
Yeah. A friend of mine was talking to me about that. I put the book in my like a list on Amazon. I was thinking about getting it at one point. It seems like rather wild. I mean, he's literally saying that the two hemispheres of the mind were not integrated until like 4,000 years ago or something like this. And so your right hemisphere was like a god telling you something, and it just struck me as
basically,
wow. I mean, I'm not, maybe this is kooky as hell, or maybe this is like, wow, really insightful. Go ahead, because you know something about this. Josh?
Yeah, the research substantiating. Can I come through?
Keep speaking.
Substantiating that hypothesis has really only been done in the last 4 or 5 years. His hypothesis he generated, I think, in the mid to early 70s. But yeah, so his hypothesis is that there was one hemisphere essentially of that people experienced all nations that directed their action. Unihemispherical brain
Richard's
split into
broke.
two as different tribes across history started confronting opposing tribes with opposing gods, opposing cultures, and things like that, and the development of the written word kind of coincided with that as well. It's a little bit since I read it, but in that let's just it's true. It seems like a hard nut to crack that you can corral a population where at any time some percentage of people are essentially going to be having mystical, borderline religious experiences where they're being commanded to do particular kinds of things. I guess really the question I'm concerned with is, there seems to be like an attempt to eliminate these unpleasant facts of existence in this future hypothetical Apollonian society that I just don't know. We don't even understand these things well enough. I don't know how you would kind of force them into submission, into some kind of to cohere with this Apollonian.
Well, you're making a criticism that is kind of not the one I usually hear. The one I usually hear is that either this isn't Christianity or this is wrong, or you guys are inventing a religion or something, and you're making the criticism that it just isn't mystical enough. So
I'm writing.
Hold on. Is Josh breaking up for everyone else? He's breaking up for me.
Yeah,
that
yeah, he is.
He is? Okay.
Yeah.
Josh, we're going to move on to someone else just because you're kind of roboting.
Skynet's coming.
No doubt. Okay. Does anyone else want to do this? I'm getting a bit hungry, so I might take 3 more questions. And also, if you've already spoken or you don't want to speak anymore, you can get off and then. Okay, so I'll do that. Collector of Souls.
Good evening. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
I've been listening to these, and I always have so much fun, and they're always such highbrow conversations, so I don't want to dumb this down too much.
Maybe you should.
I know, right? I'll bring it down a couple notches. I grew up with a mother that wouldn't really put us on medications and stuff like that. She would take more of the holistic approach to things. And, for instance, when I was a kid, I was diagnosed probably like everyone else with ADHD. My daughter is not happy. And let me put a cartoon on. And my dad wanted to put me on Ritalin, and my mom just fought it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and I appreciate that and that kind of stuff. But now here I am, an adult with my own kids, and I'm kind of grappling with the vaccine. And I'm not anti-vax. I'm not anti-science. I'm not anti-medicine. I just I want to know how you came to your decision and what kind of research you did between them, and kind of how you landed where you're at with that.
Okay, sure. Let me mention something. I've joked around about this with some of my kind of like private calls that I do, but I'll just let you guys know my perception of this. So Joe Rogan, okay, I like Joe Rogan. I think that he is authentic, and there are a lot of good conversations that happen on his program, and I think he's just kind of a cool guy. Like, I would like to have a beer with him, so to speak. And even some of his conversations, even about COVID, say in 2020, like he would have a physician on who was an intellectual, and it was, I think these were like great services to the world, and it just in the terms of like informed discussion. But I hate to sound like a liberal here, but I saw that video of him describing catching COVID, and I think in his own words, threw the kitchen sink at it. So he was taking steroids, he was taking ivermectin, he was taking this, he was taking that, all at once. They just did all of this stuff, and then he's good and clear now, which is great news. I think Joe Rogan, who seems to be in very good health, would almost no doubt have survived a coronavirus infection. But he threw all this medicine. And he hasn't taken the vaccine. Now, do you really want me to believe that he is skeptical of the vaccine in kind of vague ways, but all of the stuff that he's like read on the internet that's been sent to him in DM circles or whatever, that this is not like much more dangerous, and in fact, putting it together into one cocktail is going to lead to unintended chemical reactions and so on. If you're skeptical of the vaccine, I mean, I think there's reason to be skeptical, but the notion that the governments around the world just want to kill us all or harm us profoundly, I just think is a completely false notion, and it seems to kind of inform all of this skepticism, so that it's diabolical in some way. And I don't believe that the government wants to kill us all. I think the government wants us to be good workers. And so I just don't buy like the basic vaccine skepticism at its starting point. And, I did some research in the sense of like, what are these things? What is it? A kind of mRNA, therapy, et cetera. And there wasn't really anything that led me to believe that I would have a bad reaction. I did do some minor research, but I think just suggesting that everyone do their own research, I think that is just encouraging people to go down all these crazy rabbit holes and end up just like, dousing themselves with some bizarre cocktail that they heard about from their Facebook group, which is just going to be much worse than taking a vaccine. it was also weird that, Joe Rogan, he's in good health. I think he could have probably just stuck it out. Like if he was feeling bad because he caught COVID, he probably could have taken some hot tea and, an Advil or something and just kind of slept it off. That's what I do with most illnesses. I don't medicate myself heavily, and I just get a lot of sleep and, just stay hydrated. It seems like he would have done that. But why did he do this? Why did he go on this bizarre regimen of medication? It's almost as if he believed that coronavirus was really serious and that he was in jeopardy of dying. I don't think he was actually. So I don't know. I just used some kind of basic logic and common sense, and reached the conclusion that the vaccine is going to be okay. And I have never caught coronavirus to my knowledge. And I never had antibodies in my system. So it seems like either I just kind of escaped the pandemic in some way, or maybe for whatever reason, I have a certain robustness where I'm not even infected with it. I don't know, but I never caught it. And so it's probably good to be vaccinated. I've been vaccinated for a whole kit and caboodle of stuff. My dog is heavily vaxxed. I don't know. There is a kind of conspiratorial starting point that I think is actually pretty toxic, so to speak, which is that the government is trying to kill you. I hate to say it, but it's worse than that. The government wants you to stay alive. Even more horrifying.
Yeah, no kidding.
It won't let you die. It won't kill you. It will keep you here.
Hey, everyone that's listening, maybe with 100%, give me how many people here are vaxxed in this group? One. I see one. Not a whole lot. Is that really true, everybody?
I wouldn't read too much into that. I think there's probably a lot of passive listeners here. I don't know. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's higher or lower than the average. Where are we at? 50 or 60% now?
173 listeners.
Well, no, what I mean is, where are we on the national average?
Oh, boy, yeah. I don't. That's kind of why I'm here asking you. I don't pay much attention to it. And honestly, I'm not in the gang of, they're out to get me and they're going to poison me and I'm going to die from it. I kind of do my own thing, and I go to work every day, and it's just not really a big part of my life. However, I play in a band that plays internationally, and I'm afraid that we're not going to be able to play anywhere unless we're all vaxxed. So we're kind of talking about that in our.
I would just get vaxxed.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. I don't have a doctor. I'm in between insurance, so I actually went to Target and talked to the pharmacist, and she was actually a wealth of knowledge and a really nice lady. And I mentioned a heart problem that I had when I was younger, arrhythmia. Fill up with blood, and then it doesn't all escape. I don't drain all the blood out of my heart on each pump, on each beat. So she was kind of concerned that maybe it wouldn't be an ideal move for me.
Okay, that's fair. I'm sure there are people like that. I don't have those problems, knock on wood. And so for me, I was more just kind of interested, like, what is this? What's going on with this thing? Almost from an intellectual level. Like, I want to know what is happening. This isn't a vaccine, and it's not a small dose of the virus itself, and you survive it and build up antibodies. It's something else, and I wanted to learn what that was. But for you, I mean, I absolutely won't give you any medical advice, but you seem to be a down-to-earth person who's making like rational decisions. I mean, there very well might be a group of people who shouldn't get vaxxed. That's a totally reasonable position. But the conservatives are not they're not avoiding the vaccine for like rational reasons. They have been irrational about the pandemic since it began.
Yeah, totally. So do you think that Joe Rogan would have you on his show, or do you think he would recoil at the idea?
Well, I think I had a window when probably he would have done it, and maybe I should have worked harder in getting on. I think now it might be kind of like, oh, Spencer, that's yesterday's news, whatever. Maybe if I can, when my book comes out or something, then we could be like, all right, this is worthwhile, having me on. I think now that he's on Spotify, there might be a revolt among his ranks. He did delete like interviews he did with Milo and so on. So I think that's an indication that he wouldn't do it. I would certainly love to do it, but there was a kind of weird window where I was in the news, and so people could kind of justify having me on, like, oh well, we have to learn what he thinks about. And so that was one of the first time I did even mainstream conservative podcasts and things like that, and that was good. But I feel like we're not there right now. It kind of saddens me on some level, but that's one of the reasons why I like doing these, because I can get a lot of different thoughts out and talk with people. But yeah, I would definitely love to go on his show. I still do think he's a cool guy. It's just when he did that, like, this is my ivermectin cocktail like video, I was just like, all right, man, you really look like a fucking idiot. But anyway, all right.
Hey, I appreciate it.
Sure. Barley, do you want to speak? Barley Kirk Wumbo face.
The photoshopped picture of Charlie Kirk's face where his face is a lot. Yeah. Anyway, I don't know if we've kind of passed the moment at this point, but I wanted to go back to the Christianity conversation for a minute. I don't know. I feel like there are kind of two main things to me as someone who's not an Apollonian or Christian. But in terms of Christianity, one, every rational or ethical decision you make fundamentally is kind of calibrated around the delusion of an afterlife. And I do think it does necessarily logically follow these kind of liberal, individualist, feminist values from Christianity, in a large sense because of the earlier issue is that you're making decisions in the ultimate goal that you're really just trying to get to heaven, and everything else is kind of a sideshow, and the material world kind of goes by the wayside. I don't know if people would like to respond. I know lots of people kind of like debate about whether or not, heaven is literally real or whatnot, but it certainly seems like, 90% of Christians in the real world kind of walk around with that sense. So I'm curious.
Well, I mean, there's
the
typical atheist response, which is like, if heaven's so great, why don't you kill yourself right now? Like, what's stopping you? And obviously, the all everlasting has fixed his canon against self-slaughter, and you don't do that, and so on. But it kind of is a reasonable question. And I think with there are pagan conceptions of something like an afterlife, but they're these dark places of shadows. It's not a place that is your real life. Your best life is not now. Your best life is afterwards. And that is, in fact, your real life in that realm. And this is, in some ways, an illusion.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So I do think that is fundamentally world denying. And whether that was present in Judaism is worth thinking about. I might say no, but that definitely has been the codification of this once Christianity began. And you need a kind of project in this world where we can achieve eternity in this world, and whether that's accomplished through architecture or through the continuation of a race or a continuation of a thought system or something like that, that's a kind of eternity in this world. But you create that because you understand that you're going to be gone at some point, and it might be a realm of shadows or it might be oblivion. And so we want to create eternity here. And I think that would be the kind of conception that I have. I think there is a sense of it's all about afterwards. It just fundamentally doesn't matter. Now, have Christians built, glorious, long-lasting monuments to God in this world? Of course they have. But we also need to kind of get at the root concept and see how it can be just fundamentally demotivating and demoralizing.
Yeah, I agree. And it also kind of seems to me like maybe a bad analogy, but having, 4-year term cycles for politicians, shortening fundamentally, your time horizon for things, rather than improving this world for, living on through your kin, you're ultimately, just trying to follow the, what's the word? The instruction manual for how to, get on to the next stage. And then you're just there for,
I mean, I
forever.
think we would probably, even like Kloitkin, who probably, strongly disagrees with some things that I've said. I mean, I think he would agree that it's better to extend the time horizon. And the worst way to do that is through 2-year election cycles, or the 24-hour news cycle, or the 2-hour social media cycle, or whatever. And that, on some level, all of this politics is just these just, like, I don't know what the right metaphor is, just these like hamster wheels that are all going on all around us, and there's no one actually looking up to the stars and trying to navigate where this ship is headed. And I mean, I think that's a huge problem. And one of the better ways to do that is to have term limit reforms. And by that, I mean really the opposite of people who talk about term limits all the time. Well, I would extend term limits.
Yeah.
But again, that's all, I obviously don't want to extend term limits with the morons we have, in charge now. It would have, but I think just extending the time horizon is a very good thing. Do you want to jump in, Kloitian?
Yeah. I mean, I guess we could have like a mature debate about whether Christianity is world denying. I think that's like a big topic. I'm actually just going to riff off this and ask you a question that was kind of related. I'm curious. I know you recently said that you're more sympathetic to Protestantism than to Roman Catholicism. I think that was kind of a recent development. I know in the past you had said that you are attracted to like Catholic Baroque architecture and art, and kind of the classical Hellenistic values and some elements of Catholicism. I'm curious which denomination of Christianity, I should say Protestant or Catholic, is more guilty in your judgment of this kind of world-denying asceticism. I think most people would say classically Protestantism, but I think with the Reformation you do get, especially with like Martin Luther's polemics against clerical celibacy, you do get a kind of sensuality in Protestantism, which I think looked a lot.
Yeah, well, there certainly was there's iconoclasm within Christianity in general, and I mean the birth of Christianity might have coincided with the largest destruction of art and books in world history. So there are strong iconoclastic elements there. Definitely, which would I prefer, to see a Michelangelo or to go to your average megachurch where it's really just indistinguishable from a shopping mall, and in more ways than one, not just architecturally. And obviously, I would give that to the Catholics. In terms of promoting asceticism, I mean, the Catholics kind of took the cake on that one. I think I would be more sympathetic towards Protestantism, just in the sense of there's a certain degree of, I mean, I know I'm talking against like fetishizing text and so on, but there is just a certain degree of seriousness with a reformed outlook of saying we're actually going to take this thing seriously, and we're not just going to live by some of these things that the church has accrued over time. I mean, purgatory would be an excellent example. And we're actually going to kind of get back to the heart of what this is really about, and we're going to take this seriously. I probably have a lot of, I would be more sympathetic towards that. I know maybe I'm being really contradictory here, although wouldn't be the first time.
I just want to say I'd love to discuss this another time. Unfortunately, I have to run, but
Okay.
if anybody
Yeah, thanks
wants
for the
to
question.
directly reach out, I'm curious to hear what the Christian response to that would be.
Yeah. Excellent question. Okay, guys, lightning round. Just say really quick comments or questions, then I'm going to go. I'm hungry.
Greece or Rome?
Rome.
Do you believe in aliens?
I think there must be life of some kind out there somewhere. So yeah.
Yeah.
There just must be. I don't know. Maybe not. But it seems like the universe is so vast that there's some kind of form, but it might take a form that we wouldn't quite even like comprehend. It's not going to be like a Vulcan, or a green man or something. It might be just in some form of life that we can't comprehend, and it very well might be a terrifying insect that wants to eat us if we could ever make contact with it.
We could be aliens for all we know. We could be evolved from bacteria on a meteorite or something.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Will the censorship ease up now that Trump is gone?
I don't think so.
Against zero-sum politics against our opponents.
Say again?
Our opponents play zero-sum politics. How do we combat against this?
Well, the right generally fails at zero-sum politics. It cancels like the wrong people or so on. I think if I try, what I try to do is to try to like get out of the polarization, because I think with polarization you can't think straight. And in my own little way, I have very little power. But in my own little way, I try to kind of get out of the right-left, division.
No,
and
I don't believe in this false dichotomy. I don't believe in this false dichotomy.
Yeah. But there's no question that the left is playing zero-sum politics and that they want us to starve to death, or at least a percentage of them do. And that is something, because we don't have that. We don't have an Antifa force that's going to do that back to them, and we don't have the means of doing it back to them. So I think being a little bit cryptic and hiding a little bit is actually in order at this point.
Using irony? That's pretty tough for me.
I didn't say irony exactly. Look, yeah, maybe use a little irony. But I just said be careful with what you say, and don't fight every battle and die on every hill.
Okay.
And it's okay to hide sometimes. I get into that mentality of just like, 2016, 2017, I just want to be out there. I just want to be in the arena. They've got a lot of people in that arena, and sometimes it's good to not fight every battle. And
2016 was so far long ago.
It feels like a long time ago. Yeah.
Yes, it was. I was there.
Mm-hmm.
Topical, but have you read Leo Strauss's Persecution and the Art of Writing?
Yes.
Might be worthwhile for people just to write to give it a look.
I agree.
That's my question. I'm done.
Okay. All right, gents and ladies. Thanks. And I'll talk to you guys soon. Awesome conversation as always. All right. Have a good Labor Day. Go out and grill.
See ya.
Grill everything you can.